everyone. Good evening. You're joining the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. My name is Diana Zarzuelo, and I'm filling in for Dr. Bob Sanborn, who is out with the team in Washington, D.C., advocating for Texas children. So we're very glad he's doing that. I get the honor of interviewing Jose Villarreal, who is Executive Director of Avance Houston. In fact, our speaker last week, Diane McGehee from Together and Hope,
yes.
She named you guys as one of the most effective nonprofits in Houston.
Thank you.
Nice
way to start off a class.
Exactly. So just a little bit about Jose. Again, he's Executive Director of Avance, which is a United Way agency and federally funded to provide high-quality early childhood education and parent education to Houston kids. The organization employs about 400 people and has pioneered a multi-generation parent and child education program that has been recognized nationally and rigorously evaluated and proven to be effective. The organization has been twice recognized in the last 4 years as one of the best nonprofit communications teams. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And their model, again, has been recognized by the Head Start National Association and the Aspen Institute. So Jose has been in a number of leadership positions as executive director of other nonprofit organizations and other public administration positions, but we'll be focusing today on your current role as ED of Avance. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I've met some of your students in class today and just welcome the opportunity to talk to so many people online or physically present here in the classroom. It's an exciting field to be in early childhood education, as you know from your work. There's lots of developments taking place, and there's lots of public discussions of early childhood education. Avance's focus is involving the parent with the child, and that's what makes our two-generation model a little unique. It's exciting, and there's some nice data that's coming out of that. And I think policymakers, people who make the rules for how you fund programs and funding sources, are recognizing that parent engagement is a key part of educational success. So we're at the beginning, I think, Avance as Children at Risk and other organizations in terms of really pioneering some concepts that can transform or change educational outcomes. And so I think it's exciting to be in it.
So talk a little bit about that, sort of being on the pioneer side of a new approach and new framework for working with families. The TED Talk, the students sort of look at TED Talks each week, and this week there's a TED Talk about being a pioneer and how to be sort of at the forefront and really get the early followers involved first to sort of make your movement get started. Talk a little bit about being on the pioneer side.
That's a really great question, and so and I'll have to look up at the TED Talks. I rely on them frequently, and I refer them to staff when I'm trying to explain the concept or generate some new ideas. I think one of the things is that when you move forward with a new idea, there's a whole concept of learning in terms of how you change management, so how you change an organization and how you change the community around you. So one of the most important things is you can't do it alone. So you have to have people with you. So one of the techniques and strategies that I think that works very well with a pioneering concept is to enroll your coworkers, your colleagues, your board members, the people who are part of your network to become believers in whatever you're pioneering, the new concept. And you can always find people, this is kind of one of the things I say, come on, it's parent engagement. Don't you think that's important?
Yeah.
And so people will automatically say, okay, of course, parent engagement. It's a very logical choice. But it's a complex subject. It's not so easy to implement or to apply. But I think, so getting those people that are around your network, behind you, and also, you mentioned the award for nonprofit communications. One of the things that's important in communications is everyone in the company or the organization has to be reciting the same message, So we got to get the message, the key points, so that your key administrators, the board members, your key staff that are program staff, also are also able to convey the same message about parent engagement, and that's why it's important. then I think the other piece on top of that is the employees and yourself have to feel good about the work that you're doing. That's what you call, if I'm talking about myself, I like the work. They
Right.
call it passion.
Right.
So your employees have to share that passion, and it's not passion. It's not always just a natural. You have to kind of sort of stroke it a little bit, give it some support.
Ignite it, right?
Ignite it, exactly. Yeah,
We all,
that's a good
I
word.
think in the nonprofit world, myself included, come in because we are passionate about a particular thing, about expanding economic opportunity or supporting children and parents for better outcomes. But in the day-to-day grind, nonprofit work is incredibly challenging. Sometimes we're working with limited capacity, limited funds, and limited staff sometimes, and so your passion can dwindle no matter where you started, just
Right.
because of the grind, I think.
Exactly, and I think the work is hard. So I think it would be just to let people know, especially if you're in a decision making and kind of a leadership role. I can look back at my 30 years in nonprofits. I have spent most Sunday afternoons in the office, or Saturday afternoons, or Friday nights, or Thursday nights, because it just takes, to be good, it's hard work. And you have to work at it to be good at it. It's kind of like the Malcolm Gladwell's comment is, if you do something 1,000 times, you'll be good at it.
Practice makes perfect. Yeah.
Right, so you have to kind of, if you have a concept, you're pioneering, you have to practice it, you have to really intimately know it, you have to keep working at it, you have to plan, what are you going to do. So my Sunday afternoons is really getting organized for the week and making sure I have my details that you're going to manage during the week, and some objectives lined up, so that how am I going to get the message out? So what I think, but to me, the Sunday afternoons is the fun work, because that's kind of the sort of the brain trust, the sort of the development that you have to kind of strategize. You have to think about it, and then you have to be able to recall that during the week, because you'll get involved with, okay, there's a child care licensing issue somewhere, or a parent is complaining about the curriculum or the teacher, or the bus drivers are going too fast down the parking lot. Those are details that you come in on Monday morning, and the especially in September, the air conditioner's out. We need somebody to come and fix it, or should we send the children home?
Yeah.
And so those are the things that kind of eat up your time, and so you have to. So when you have those moments, it's like, okay, we're still trying to get this piece done in terms of build the network, get this paper out. Invite them to the meeting so we can have this discussion. Those things have to get done, and that's the kind of things why I love Sunday afternoons.
Yeah.
Is I get to kind of get myself organized for that. For I think the big things, what I call the leadership visionary things, but that makes you ready to handle all the details also. So
Right. It's really important to make that time for yourself, right? The sort of reflective vision strategy. Again, with the day-to-day, that can often go neglected. That's really important.
Right.
So, well, looking back on your 30 years of experience in nonprofits and public administration and your leadership development, what would you say are the standout chapters if you were to write a leadership book?
Yeah.
The one or two, three chapters that really stand out as lessons.
And I'm going to give you just a little different twist than what you normally hear.
Okay.
So normally you hear you have to be committed to the vision. You have to be visionary. You have to. And I truly believe that's what you have to do. You have to know your vision. You have to really study it. It's got to be more than just, I thought of this one night, but you have to go back and do your research, get your details, get your data, get your things to support your vision. You have to be able to articulate the vision. But I think what happens oftentimes, and I know you've seen this or heard of this before, you hear people say, well, great visionary, but he can't run the agency, or she can't run the agency.
Right.
I think I'm setting a higher standard for visionaries. Visionaries not only have to be visionaries, but they have to manage details. Because if you want to be able to implement your vision, you got to take care of the details. And the details, if you're doing this through an organization like Avance, or where you have funding and administrative responsibilities and reporting responsibilities and statutory responsibilities, you have to be aware of those details and stay on top of them. If you have a vision and you don't take care of the finances, it goes to waste.
Right,
It goes for
right,
naught.
right.
And oftentimes you lose followers because someone says, "Oh, we got to come in and take care of this crisis." They're in debt. They didn't raise enough money, and the person didn't keep track of that expenses. So the visionary's got to have a really good vision. It's got to be well articulated. It's got to be well founded. And then when you're carrying it out, you have to take care of the details. If you're in a nonprofit organization, then that means a lot of administrative responsibilities. If it's an organization but not funding and things, we still have to take care of the relationships, for example,
Right.
of the membership, if that's what it's involved. You have to keep track of what you committed to and then follow up on that. I always one of my observations is how do I know someone is going to be a really good staff? It's a staff person who takes care of the details. They commit to something, they come back and they follow up with you and said, I did this, and here's where I am. Sometimes you agree on a directive or a charge, and then you don't hear back from the person or something,
Right.
so they have to follow up.
Right.
But then you yourself have to follow up to see where they are with it, because
Right.
otherwise
that
you,
takes up a lot of mental space, keeping
exactly,
track of
exactly.
those things. Yeah.
So it's good if you can keep track of a lot of details, and I think that's an important piece too for a complex organization. So, and you've got to the most important thought in terms of leadership and having a vision for an organization, leadership in an organization, you've got to live by the principles that you preach. In other words, if your organization espouses certain principles, you have to live them. Okay. I think another issue that you don't always have, but I think you want to have people working with you who live the experience. The organization has to be able, if you can hire people who have lived the experience that you're working to eliminate support, to construct
Right. That they have that personal
they have to have
connection.
that connection with it. I think that's an important aspect of an organization. If you have people in your organization who have lived the experience that you're trying to resolve, to work with, that's another important part. I think in terms of another quality of the organization that I think has to be well run. So there's something we're going to talk about here. It's called the strategic plan. So you hear it a lot. So the strategic plan basically says, what you want to do over a 5-year period. So we're going to say, in our case, we've said we want every child that leaves Avance to be school ready and every parent to be self-sufficient. Okay. So over 5 years, they're all going to be there. So that's what you try for. That's a lofty. It's a high, ambitious goal. Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then you have to define, how am I going to get there? So every organization has to have a good strategic plan, and the leadership or the administrators have to be able to say, here's how we're going to make this goal, because every year you have to look at it and say, here's the goals we set for this year to be able to get to that 5-year goal.
Right.
So
right.
Those are important. So I would say having a vision, having a leader who can not only articulate the vision, but also know how to manage the details that go with that vision. I think that's an important piece. I think the other one is you have to have people in the organization who have lived the experience that you're trying to address. That's one. And I think the other one is a well-managed organization has a good strategic plan, and has some purpose. The vision defines purpose. The strategic plan gives you what are your goals that you're trying to achieve to make sure that purpose works. And so those are important. And I think I'm just going to say, in every organization that I've worked with, you got to keep track of your finances and be able to account for your finances.
Yeah.
That just kills a lot of organizations. So knowing finance is an important piece. We'll talk about that later, because a lot of people say, well, I'm going to go into public nonprofit, so I don't have to deal with, I don't like accounting, or I don't like math, I don't like numbers.
Right.
You need to know all of that.
Yeah.
But don't be afraid of it. It actually
Yeah.
works out well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, just on that point, how do you see the differences between the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector? Are there any significant differences?
So I would say the difference is, I think nonprofits are more efficient, they're more cost effective, they keep better track of their finances, especially if it's a well-run one. But I think they're also more productive in most cases, because you have to have employees who believe in the mission and are willing to do whatever it takes to get the mission accomplished. I think in the for-profit sector, most jobs, there are some exceptions certainly, but they're very much focused. This is my job responsibilities. This is all I have to do, and the measure in the for-profit is usually revenue and dollars. In the nonprofit, you have to be really good at not only is it keeping track of your finances, but also did you meet your products? Have you met your objectives? Some things that are a little more abstract, but you have to be able to define them in concrete terms. I think that's also another kind of check. One is somebody who follows up is a good employee. The other one is somebody who can take abstract ideas, because we live in a world of abstracts and hard to define.
Very familiar with abstract.
And the parent comes in and says, well, I think I need this. I think my child is doing this.
Right.
Not really, it's not concrete. So the staff person has to be able to articulate it in concrete terms so you can address an issue and see if it works or not. But I think, so the difference, I'm not one that buys into this concept. People say we're going to bring in some business principles into this organization. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I say, I'm ahead of you. And oftentimes,
let's bring some nonprofit principles to the business.
The business, I think there are nonprofit principles that you can bring to the for-profit world, you would get higher productivity and better, especially with the other piece is relationships. Just being able to respect your coworker and building that team spirit is important too.
So building on that, the team spirit, you've sort of alluded to what makes a great staff member. And how you work with your team and still hold yourself accountable for the details, which not all leaders do. How do you get the quality staff that you want within your organization? We're reading Jim Collins' Good to Great, and a lot of that is about getting the right people on the bus. So how do you attract people to the bus?
Very good. Okay, and that's a good question. We follow a lot of Jim Collins, and then I use a lot of his early works before Good to Great in terms of defining mission and vision and purpose and big, hairy, audacious goals is what he calls them, BHAGs. So it's setting stretch goals is what he calls. But I think, so working with staff, one of the things is that we really get the loyalty because you have to, the leader has to be accountable. When you work with staff, you have to show that you respect them. When you say we're all equal, but then you're not doing what they're doing, it doesn't bode well. Right. So you have to be able to be accountable to the people that are parts of your team and that. Now, in terms of getting them into your bus, I think we again it happens automatically, or I guess the word is organically. Because if they were there as part of the group that designed the strategic plan, and then they know that their responsibility is here, and we tend to, sounds like a crazy concept, but we say, okay, this is strategy 2, action 3, year 2, so we have little codes for them.
Wow.
But they know that they're part of that, and so they constantly report back. I would say every other senior staff meeting, we're reporting on our progress on the strategic plan.
Wow.
So, but they all have a piece of it, and they all get to also, we report to the board. It's part of our monthly report. It's a dashboard report. The dashboard report is just a summary of what you're doing in terms of the strategic plan. But, so I think we give them credit for it too. You have to recognize the staff who's doing it. So I think the key is to get the right people on the bus, you have to show that you're sharing the leadership with the people on the bus. And occasionally you run into people who don't belong in the bus, so they have to step off the bus, and you have to help them step off the bus.
Right.
Because I think that piece, I'm just going to say it's over glamorized. You say you just tell the people to get off the bus. Well, people don't get off the bus very easily.
They don't always want to let go.
The bus. And secondly, you got to live with employment laws and regulations and things, which I think obviously have a fairness, purpose, a purpose of being fair. And making sure things are vetted correctly. But I think you have to get the right people on the bus, and you do it by making sure they buy into the direction and the purpose, the reason for them having the bus and the direction that the bus is going in. So those are important. Did I answer the question correctly?
Yeah, you did. No, you did great. So tell me about a time that you think that you failed as a leader. Okay. So often, we shy away from failure. I myself, I think, grew up with a fear of failure. We're sort of programmed to think that way. But failure is a part of learning, and the only way you learn something new is to try something new. So talk about a time that you think you failed and what you learned from it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good way. The way you're couching the question is absolutely true. so there's a concept in justice, and I'm going to talk about failure in a second, but it is called restorative justice. So you really kind of take a more constructive approach to restoring the person to being a whole person. So I think failures, or I call them setbacks, and I love the word in Spanish for setbacks. It's not retrasos, which means getting behind. It's contratiempos. So just this moment in time, we fell behind. But we can catch up. So I love that. I just had fun with that word last week. So that's right. But I think the setbacks is you as a supervisor or as a manager, as a leader. So if the person reports to me and they have failed, then you want to be able to say, here's how you correct it. Here's how you restore yourself to being a whole person. Here's what we have to do to recover from this failure, and here's what you can do for the long. Here's the immediate goal in terms of we got to go recover. It's kind of take care of the disaster. That's what it was. And then long term, here's some things you need to do. I have had those experiences. I think have several of those experiences. Definitely don't mind saying when you run a nonprofit and you want to be a pioneer, you got to take risks. Okay? And so risks sometimes go awry and don't work well. I have thought of one, at a public agency that I worked with. I was a senior administrator. I decided that we were working with a community group, so I thought on my own that it was important to challenge the community group because they were making some statements that I think were not true. I did it in public. It was kind of seen as confrontational,
Oh, okay.
Wasn't it? It was intended to. I mean, it certainly may have been confrontational. It's because it's certainly the eye of the beholder. My intent was to kind of pull out the points and just say it's not totally correct. You challenge someone. That was not the culture of the organization. The culture of the organization is you let that go, you come back and handle it some other way, behind the scenes, etc. So it was a hard lesson to learn that this is part of the culture of that organization was not to take on things publicly like that. In other words, you don't want to generate more conflict because the agency is prone to being in the media in kind of a conflicting environment because it's politically there's a lot of people that are stakeholders, and the stakeholders may have polar views. So it's a very sensitive and delicate role that you play in relationships you have to maneuver. But I certainly feel like I took, and I spent a lot of time because my performance is always very high. My performance was still high in that organization, but I think my reputation with the leadership was well, some of the leaders also supported me, but not the high leadership. They thought it was not a good idea. And so I think having to earn their respect back was really where I learned a lot of lessons on that. So that was one. Important, certainly found there are alternatives. You have to be able to read the environment, and there are alternatives to how you can approach an issue. There's many different ways, and so that's one.
Great.
But I learned from that, so and you go forward. So
circling back to sort of how you described you being held accountable to your team and sort of, doing the work with them, doing your part of the details is how I sort of heard it. What is your board like? Does your board do their share of the details, or do you really keep them at a higher level and more strategic fundraising perspective? What is your board like?
I have a very good and very effective board, and it's just, I think it's the right fit for an organization like Avance. I would say, we describe the board more as mostly young, emerging leaders, really concerned about early childhood. And the reason, obviously, is we do early childhood and parenting, and so these are families who have, or leaders who have families with young children. Right. So it appeals to people who have been in the business for a long time and who are concerned about community concerns. So I have some, again, the whole range in terms of diversity of ages. It's not unusual. Our staff will say after a board meeting, we have the best board.
Really, that's great. That's not all.
I've been working with boards for a long, long time. And again, it's different issues. So the first organization I worked with, it was again a planning agency where there were political positions and there were polar groups involved, meaning groups who had opposite positions. So we would not be so kind to the board, because people would make scenes and would be public. But our board is very supportive. They're very knowledgeable of the issues that we have. They're willing to they have to come to an orientation. Being on the board has gotten much more complex than it used to be years ago. They have to sign their no, the conflict of interest statement and just any kind of other disclosure statements, meaning they may have a conflict in this area and they have to notify. Sometimes we have to ask them for their driver's license and social security numbers. If they volunteer, you have to do services, you have to do background checks. So we demand.
And this is associated with your Head Start.
With Head Start
funds.
and early,
Okay.
anything involved with early childhood. So the board members, now generally they keep to just doing board activity, so it's policy and everything. So a lot of it's not, but the driver's license, things like that, or some of the funding agencies require that. It's part of the new culture, I guess. But the board is very good. I think what makes them a really good board, some of it is they have to do, I used to kind of sort of sugarcoat when I recruited board members in the past, well, you only have to come to a meeting once a month, et cetera. We don't do that anymore. We say, look, we want you to come to the board meeting and we want you to come to a committee meeting. But once or twice a year, we have a fundraising event. We need you there for that. And then there's other events that we would like for board members to show up to represent us.
Yeah.
So it's extensive involvement. So and it's best to be honest with the board. That,
Clear expectations.
If someone is asking you questions to determine how little time they have to devote, you basically have to say, it requires a lot of time. So
This is not for you.
This is not for you. You have to be honest about it. But we have a very good board members. They're very much involved. We have, I think, again, at one time I thought, well, that's too many committees. And when we first developed the committee structure for Avance, I thought, that's too many committees. I'll never get that many board members to participate. They do. There's about 7 or 8 committees. They're active. They report at every board meeting.
Wow.
And how big is the board?
The board is about 20
okay.
people. So, but they're actively, all the action items that we vote on, it's usually a board member presents it and votes on, but there's a board member and a staff person kind of partnering on that. But the board member usually does all the discussion. Most of the discussion takes place at committee meetings. And really, for someone considering joining a board, which again, if you're in a nonprofit management program, if you can join a board, do it, because it gives you, it's a great experience to have and to understand. But I think the board member who spends time and who understands what's going on in the organization and is willing to commit that time is just a sign of a good board member. So.
Talk a little bit about the board orientation, or how do you prepare board members for the job?
Right. So the board orientation, especially with federally funded programs like Head Start, they have certain requirements they want to meet. Then I think we have some other obligations. So again, it's one of those things that I used to say, we try to keep the board orientation to an hour, but it really 2 hours. And then there are times when you say, thanks to technology, go online and read this statement, do this orientation. So it maybe take up to 4 hours to do an orientation, but we don't have to do it all at once. You could do it the first 2 months or so that you're in the board. But orientation usually talks about, the policies of Avance, how it's really the background on the organization, how we're structured, because we have a national organization that we're part, and we're a local chapter. We go through our bylaws, which is how basically how you can become a member of the organization, how the meetings are structured, the officers. We go through the committees, what the committees do, et cetera. For example, that's another part of that that's very important. In addition to that, we have to give them some background on the program. What is it? Because an organization like Avance as Children at Risk, there's lots of initiatives, and it's complex, and you don't get it the first time. And the Avance concept, we have something called the holistic model. So, and we have this, let me see if I can just pull this out in a second. So here it is. So with the holistic model, it really makes a lot of sense when you explain to people, but we say parent and child is at the center of everything that we do. The parent has to have a good relationship with the child, for the child to do well in school, and for the parent to also be able to provide the right kind of learning environment, 2 or 3. But all these other programs that we have, Head Start, Early Head Start, Fatherhood, Healthy Marriage, English Second Language, GED, and workforce programs, they're integrated into this model of what we call holistic. So you can explain it, and it concept-wise you understand, but then when you see it in practice, you begin to appreciate what it really does. So you have to spend a little time on the model, also how it works, and the board members expected to learn that. And then the other piece that you go through is the mechanics of being on the board. When you're on the board, we meet, the board meets every other month, the committees meet on the alternate months. The this is the way the meeting takes place. You got to bring your action item. It's got to be vetted. It's got to, make sure you have your all your relationships, all the key players in place, and you also have to, understand that in terms of, the board, just how important it is that you participate, because the worst thing that happens sometimes in the board meeting is that we have a quorum, and then you're calling in at the last minute, can you come to the meeting because we're short of the quorum. Well, you got to be there, because the funding sources are looking at, are your board members coming? That's one. Are your board members contributing? That's if you have private funding sources.
Right. When you're looking at the Houston nonprofit landscape, and you're really pressured to think about the high-performing, over-performing, effective nonprofits, who stands out?
Okay. I'm going to leave Avance out.
Yeah.
Because,
no self-nomination.
Can't nominate it. So I think to have a good discussion, I think with the one organization, I work with quite a few organizations. So, but the one that I think really does a good job is United Way. I think the current leadership has really done a good job of keeping both the agencies that are funded through United Way, the donors that are there, and sort of the civic leadership, all engaged on and focused on tasks, that are very, very common. And it's not unusual for United Way also to be involved with public policy issues in the city, such as, say, the issue of homelessness, or even in this task on early childhood education. They had their task force, which is kind of related to other task forces, but also kind of part of the momentum that's built up in terms of looking at how parent engagement is a big difference in terms of, and they support parent engagement programs, so obviously that's very important. But I think they also, what I like about United Way, and one that we've been trying to emulate, is how you get your strategic plan, how you make all of this sort of public, and vetted and vetted, first of all, in terms of getting some feedback, but also it's transparent. That people report on it yearly, and you can see it. You can go to the webpage and see it. I think that's one where we have a lot of documents, but they've streamlined it. We have a lot of documents that could be done, but it would be voluminous. They've streamlined that process and done a very good job. They're very good in terms of conveying their partnership with the agencies that they fund, partnership with community leaders, and they're often involved in some, with some civic leaders in working with issues revolving around the community. Homelessness is one, the food bank is the other. I mentioned early childhood.
Workforce development
now with the what's the name of the
Greater Houston Partnership.
Upskill? Right, exactly, yeah. So all of that, I think, is important. So they're quite visible. I think there are other agents that have been here a long time, that are historically, and they've done a good job and able to change and stay with the times. I mean, I would say something like DePelchin Faith Home is a really good model that able to make the adjustments. Certainly we have to say NCI has done a very good job of, being at the right place at the right time. And for strategic planning, that you have to know, as they say,
what's coming on the horizon.
You have to be where they say the puck, but here in Texas we say where the soccer ball.
Yeah.
You have to know where the soccer ball is going to land. You got to be there to make it work. So I think those organizations that do a very good job, as do Children at Risk and Avance, obviously do a very good job. I think, but those agencies stand out too because they do have a purpose and a mission vision, and are able to practice that and everything. Having a good funding base is important. So the ones I've mentioned all have a good funding base.
And what makes a good funding base?
I think that's a really good question. But I think having a mix of both federal, private funds, and private, say like United Way, which has sort of a community involvement and stakeholders. But also private foundations is important. I think, I know we talk about, in fundraising, you say, well, corporate contributions is kind of the smaller pot. I think it's really important in this community. It's more than just the corporate contribution. You have a relationship with the business community, but I've always seen businesses being a partner with the nonprofits. And that's been something, and maybe we can spend a little time on that, that I've always been sort of one that espouses that having the business as a partner, there's always a business interest or an economic interest in the work that you do. Back when I did workforce programs, that was an easy sell, but they didn't want government involvement, and I had mostly government programs. But I think eventually they came around to saying, well, we can volunteer to help your students get jobs, We can volunteer to help your students train for job interviews. So it was corporate contributions and volunteer support. So there it's a little more substantial than just the dollar contributions. In early childhood, that was kind of one of my intentions, and you know, part of my work history has been pioneering, you know, the private sector partnership with a nonprofit. And I'm going to just go back historically a little bit.
Yeah.
In 1980, kind of the Reagan administration, basically people saying, well, we have to reduce funding for nonprofit, not nonprofit, but funding for public services, public sector. And so nonprofits were part of that. But they also came up with this concept, you know, get the private sector initiatives to participate with nonprofit causes. But at the time we were, in 1980, 81, when Reagan came into office, we already had the private sector participate. So we just said, well, we'll roll out this we call it the Amigos. I work for an organization called SER, Jobs for Progress.
Yeah.
So we had something called the Amigos de SER, which was private industry getting involved with SER, you know, in terms of hiring employees, et cetera. But they didn't really want to get involved with the federally funded workforce program. So on the other hand, they could not provide the alternative. Because
private funds.
Yeah. Normally the program, at that time, say the federal programs was like $3 million to $5 million. Private contributions was like 60,000 or something. So, you know, you could never do that. But they were able to do other things, and they were very helpful. And that really kind of changed the image of the program. So it's very important. When I came to Avance, I also believed, I said, you know, early childhood education is a business concern, and there's a lot of, you know, the economic investment at stake. If you have good preschool programs, you have good education system in your community, that means people can go into the workforce at higher rates and you can raise the level of education. And it's working. I mean, I think business, we have just a constant initiative trying to getting businesses involved as volunteers, as donors, as board members, you know, however they do it. And it works, and it works well. So.
Great. Well, we're going to go to Twitter. I realize that we are, time is going by really quickly, so I want to make sure we get some questions in from our students. So let me see what we have here. So we have a question from John Boguki. I'm probably butchering that. Sorry, John. The question is, how do you determine the long-term impact of your programs and their impact on children, and how do you measure it?
Very good. We spent a lot of time, John. This is a very good question, and your timing is perfect. We spent a lot of time the last 2 or 3 months with something called the Continuous Quality Improvement. And so you often hear the acronym CQI.
That's right.
So the knock on agencies is that we, in particular Head Start agencies, we collect data for compliance. You know, the regs say you have to collect this data, so you collect the data. It's also true of my previous jobs. I was working at the community college or the transit authority. You collect a lot of data, and eventually a consultant comes by and says, okay, show me how you're using the data. Are you doing more than collecting it? So often agencies get into that syndrome of collecting data just for compliance.
Right.
So we actually have used it for quality improvement, meaning for the next year we learn something from the data so we can make an improvement. But so as when the funding sources started pushing for CQI, we were there. So it's the same as we mentioned the private sector initiative. We had already started saying we've got to figure out how to use the data to improve our programs. And one of the things we do is make sure that the data that you collect gets back to the person who collects it, right? If your teacher's collecting data on the students,
so great.
You got to get back to the teacher to say, here's what your data says. Can you make some decisions about what materials to buy or how you change your curriculum, alter it to make that sure that works. In terms of impact, that was the other thing. So when we've been involved with some national task forces on measuring impact for Head Start and early Head Start childhood education programs. And so the reason is that we are measuring impact. So we can measure, the one part of long-term impact we can measure is what happens to their income at the end of the year. So we know that parents who drop their children off at Avance, you know, are able to go back to work. And so, or one partner in this medical sector. So at the end of the year, we know there's a $3,000 difference on income on average for all the families. And that's families, that's about 2,500 families who are now earning $3,000 a year more than they were. So that's a significant income. But even going into long-term, John, usually you do that with studies. And so we've got a couple of long-term studies. So I have 2 that I want to mention. One is There's a long-term study done by a company called IDRA, I-D-R-A, out of San Antonio, which is well known recognized for doing student achievement studies. They're doing the State of Texas Attrition Study. And so they've measured the impact on Avance, and we do know that Avance children, when they go to parent-child, the Avance children have a graduation rate of 90%, all right? And what I discovered as we looked at that data is that the 90% graduation rate is because the parents are engaged with the child shows up at school every day. That's what happens. You have higher attendance rates, higher graduation rates. But we also know that home ownership goes up, and that we also know that income goes up because they go back to school. So we have figures on that, but we did that through a sampling basis. It's a study. We also have a longitudinal study in connection with Houston Independent School District, and we know that the Avance children, one measure of long-term impact is how are they doing at 3rd grade. Often the knock on Head Start and preschool programs is at 3rd grade, the advantage fades out. The Avance children's impact did not fade out. They actually continue to achieve at a higher rate than the rest of their peers from other Head Start programs and other preschool programs in HISD. So we know that's 5 years after they left Avance, 4 years after they left Avance. So we know they're doing better. So we've done that it's a longitudinal study. And so it's all the children that have enrolled in. We're now doing longitudinal study in Pasadena with what's called early Head Start, which are children in an early childhood program at ages 0 to 3. So Pasadena wants to see how they do when they get to preschool. So they just started. So it's the first group will get to kindergarten, I think another year from now. So we're looking at that. So what we say at Avance is how we do measures is we look at studies. So we're partnered with HISD, we are partnered with the medical center who are doing some long-term impact studies, and we obviously partner with a national office which does a study from time to time on all the Avance children. We look at data from Avance that we collect yearly, and impact data, economic data is another one. And then obviously we have the children's scores from the long-term longitudinal study. And then we also, the other thing is say we are data informed. By data informed we mean we look at data and we listen to people. So we listen to the family development worker who works with the families. We listen to the teacher. We listen to parents. We listen to administrators, and we listen to the board. That's all been built into our continuous quality improvement, which means that sometimes you have data that says something, but the teacher will tell you, no, that's not really true. This is what really is happening, stuff. And the example I give is there's lots of data that says the economy is doing very well, and you tell that to people and say, well, wait a minute, there's more people employed, but they're part-timers.
Right,
so,
right. You have to look at it carefully.
You have to see what people are, you have to listen to what people are saying. Listening, by the way, is one of the most important qualities of a leader also. So in any organization, you have to have ways to listen.
Just a follow-up question on this. Did you feel like the studies investing, because a lot of organizations sometimes find it hard to invest in rigorous evaluation, particularly third-party evaluations, because it, some, I'm not in this camp, but some may argue that it draws necessary funds from the delivery.
Right.
So do you feel like this investment was worth it? How has it changed the organization's perception externally or nationally? And talk about the value, I guess.
Right. So obviously, internally, the staff feels really good. That says, oh, we're getting good results. So that validates what they've done. And one of the things that's happened that we saw is that about 5 years ago, we say, oh, we got to work on math, because that's a weakness. So now our kids are doing, their best scores are in math. So, how people say, well, sometimes people say, well, the reading scores predict what you're going to do, and some people say the math scores predict what you're going to do. Well, now I believe that math predicts. Is it better predict? No, they both, just because we had good math scores. So anyway, I'm very happy with that. So, but for the staff to see that working, and it's obviously it's worth it, and also getting it to the teacher is important. So that they make sure there's a reason for it. Okay, in terms of the question, it's kind of interesting because I noticed usually the way you get funded is you answer what's called a request for proposal, an RFP, and oftentimes it looks it's kind of a big document. This is not the RFP itself, but it would look something like this, and it tells you all the rules and laws that go into creating that program and what has to be met in that proposal response. I noticed that a lot of the RFPs, requests for proposals, came with an evaluation research component to it. And so often it's you'll have to remember, randomized RCT, randomized controlled trial,
Right.
which means you have to go recruit the 100 people you're going to enroll in your class and possibly another 100 people that you're going to test. And so 100 will get in, 100 will not, and you have to track what happens to the 100 who did not and the 100 who did. And compare 5 years later, did the group that get in do any better than the group that did not get in? Now, there's different ways of doing randomized controlled trials, but that's the simplest definition of that. But so they all came with that. So both can be managed and they're important. Usually what they say, there's additional funding if you do the evaluation research. So it doesn't get into the basic funding of the program. I think the biggest issue for us is actually the ethical issue. And we have so another aspect of Avance that you don't find in other organizations. We have in a university, we have an institutional research board, IRB, which if you're doing studies, you have to evaluate whether there's any infringement and any violations of ethical issues. So we have, because we're involved in so many studies, we have our own, we call it institutional research policy process, group. And so we have to look at it because I think it's difficult to determine the value of the research versus how can you go out and set expectations for 100, 200 people and only take 100 and the other 100 you're going to say, well, we can't. Yeah, we're going to test you. So it's a real difficult, especially for someone who runs a nonprofit and really believes in, we got to get service to everybody. But anyway, so that you have to kind of weigh that the ethical issue. It's actually more important, I think, than the issue of the money and stuff. So,
let's see what else we have. This is an interesting question from Moises Fabella. What challenges does your organization face in keeping families motivated to attend your programs and stay engaged?
So I think that's not as, so the parents, once they get hooked, it's really, we really try to get to both parents, if there's two parents present, the father and the mother. That's not always the case with all families, so you have to understand it. But so trying to get the other parent involved is usually, particularly in the Latino culture, trying to get the husband there is a difficult challenge. But what we find is once they get to class, and the facilitators, or the instructor, but usually we call them facilitators, are very good at really kind of making that person really building up their self-esteem, making the person feel good. Those are the things that people like the best. I think when they come to class, mostly the mothers find a support group of other people who are wearing the same shoes. In other words, they're kind of having the same issues to deal with, so they have a chance to socialize and talk to someone, and those are the ways. I think, so for parenting, it's just getting to the first class, and when they find out you have the early childhood care is there, we call it early childhood education, but in this case we're taking care of the child, then that's also the big barrier, is can I get childcare, can I get transportation? We can take care of that. And so those are issues that often discourage people from coming, but since we address those, then they would tend to come. I think, then there's others where, coming to English second language and GED, we basically say you have to come to class 4 days a week. If you come 2 days a week, you'll never finish. So we want people to come 4 days a week. So sometimes, sometimes they have to go to work, their car breaks down, or there's family responsibilities that keeps them from coming. But generally, they want to be able to come. One thing that we are doing, and it's kind of appropriately so in this environment, is people who are not studying GED can also take it online. So we teach them online skills, which is a big factor, I think, in getting them advanced.
Right.
And we'll still be able to do that for ESL, but that's coming later, English second language. But that's another way of keeping them engaged with the program and current. And then at times you just have to do other things. Like sometimes we work with the food bank, so that particularly like in the skills training program, the food bank says every 2 weeks, if you attend classes for 2 weeks, you get your groceries, right? So groceries. So incentives is another way to do that also. So stuff. But validation, seeing their child and seeing progress is kind of the most important part of that, and they begin to feel good about the program.
Yeah. This is a great question from Mari Trevino. How do you see Avance changing in the next 5 years, and what is your role and your leadership in creating that change?
Right. Your timing on this class is just perfect. So we just finished something called the Vision 2025, which is 10 years from now.
Okay.
So one of the things that we see ourselves doing is scaling up, meaning, okay, we're serving about 7,000 individuals a year. It's about 3,000, it's almost half, the number of families, 3,500 families a year in some kind of program or another. And so I think what we've done to scale up is say, okay, we're addressing families in poverty and children that are under 5 with who are eligible for preschool. We know there's about 40,000 kids that get into preschool. The other 70,000 do not. So there's 70,000 more kids and families who would need to be addressed, the model we have at Avance. So by scaling up is, how can we take our numbers from 7,000 to 21,000 a year? But then how can we work with other organizations to do their share, so that we're really saying there's 112,000 poor, low-income children in this, and 70,000 are not getting childcare, but between the 4 of us or the 5 of us, we're going to take care of half of that population.
Yeah.
So in terms of how we're going to do that, that's kind of a very quantitative measure, but we see ourselves as scaling up, making a larger program, also doing some piloting some experimental programs. I think right now there's a lot of emphasis on, I mentioned restorative justice, so that parenting, fatherhood, all those programs can be done in restorative justice settings, and in increasing the workforce opportunities for the families that we serve. So I think those are important. Workforce right now is just embryonic, it's just starting. We feel very important that it's important to offer to our families at their level, meeting them at their level, and then kind of taking them up to building up their skill level to be able to move into the next level of job placement and careers and wage earning.
Yeah, great. Well, there are a few fun questions that we always ask of our guests, so I'm going to go and segue to those. What is your favorite restaurant in Houston?
Okay, so the favorite restaurant, I'm going to give you my top 3 restaurants.
Oh, wow. Okay. You are always an overachiever, aren't you?
It's up to me. My favorite restaurant right now is Caracol. So Caracol is seafood restaurant.
So good.
And it's run by the same person who runs Hugo's. So Hugo's is a great restaurant also. That's why I have to mention too. But Caracol is over in Post Oak and Uptown. But
Do you go for their brunch, or?
I've not been to their brunch, but I've been to their
fabulous.
dinners. It's just, okay, I see you're a foodie also, so anyway. But I thought the menu was just great. Yeah. I do a little bit of cooking myself, so I kind of appreciate what they've done and put together. But I'm always, I think particularly for a chef and a culinary person, they've got to be both an artist and a scientist. Art in terms of you have to really create something that looks great and it's beautiful, and you have to be creative in terms of how you engineer something new.
Right.
But scientists, you have to measure, and you have to do it just right and things. It's not the way my mother used to make tortillas. My mother used to you say a batch of this and a batch of that, and you get your flour. But I think Caracol and Hugo's is just a great restaurant. From kind of the lower end breakfast type, taqueria type places, there's a place it's called Tecate, and it's on Ella Boulevard in 610. But anyway, it's just, to me, it's just the right type of Mexican restaurant.
Yeah.
I like that too.
All right. What is your favorite hidden secret venue in Houston?
Okay, I like music. So one of those that I like, I don't know if it's hidden, but it's hidden to most people. It's called the Big Easy, which is a blues club on Kirby. But I just love to hear the musicians and love to see their music. I also, so that's a good place to go. That's the one that's more hidden is there's a restaurant, deli called Phoenicia. And Phoenicia's kind of fun. And on some nights they have entertainment, and they have, like the Sunday nights, I think it's young kids who are taking guitar lessons or something.
Oh, right. That's fun.
And singing, so they perform, and so that's kind of a nice place. That's a fun place to go.
That was the first place where I saw grocery store meets wine bar food.
So
that's pretty cool.
So don't talk to me about wine, because I can give you a list too.
And who would play you in a movie? If they were doing a movie on your life, who would play you?
Quick answer for you. It's Edward J. Olmos.
Oh, okay.
It's everybody. Everybody likes Edward J. Olmos. I think it's just because his movies are associated with causes that I support. Yeah. I think I remember, it was So we're about the same age. So there was a group out of, I think, either UCLA or Southern Cal, where he was from. But it was called Teatro Público, Teatro de la Gente, or something. It was kind of a people's theater at the time, and they were doing plays and things. And I think in college, I remember borrowing some of their stuff and replicating it, at that time, as part of our organization and things. So I remember him from way back, and then kind of watching his career and stuff. And he's been very good to the organizations that I've been associated with. So that's
that's great too.
So
That's nice.
So if he could, I think he could play me out.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jose. We really appreciated you being here. I think we could probably have a whole another hour with you, just picking your brain about leadership lessons. So we really appreciate your time, and we hope to have you potentially here in the future another time.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. It's been a pleasure. I think you've got some great questions. I believe this is a great program. I'm familiar with it from the beginning when people were trying to create it. I met some of your students. One or two are Avance families, so we're happy. So we're happy that the lessons of Avance work. We encourage people to continue kind of pursuing their careers. But I think you've got some, and I've met people from your program in the past, in the community. Great program, and I think it's going in the right direction, and it's what we need for Houston, for the nonprofits, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.